1960, UFOs. The public has a right to know. Here is some information on how the Central Intelligence Agency has been monitoring UFO groups starting in the 1960s. If you think about it, why would they go to so much trouble? The most vociferous civilian UFO research organization, opposing government secrecy, in the 50s and 60s, was the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, or NICAP, founded by a former Navy physicist, Thomas Townsend Brown, in 1956, and headed for many years by Major Donald Kehoe, U.S. Marine Corps. NICAP's Board of Governors at one time included former Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, Vice Admiral Roscoe Hillenkoetter, who had been Pacific Commander of Intelligence during World War II. While on the NICAP board, he made a number of extraordinary statements attesting to the reality and seriousness of the UFO phenomenon. He was convinced that UFOs were unknown objects operating under intelligent control, and that the Air Force is still censoring UFO sightings. Hundreds of authentic reports by veteran pilots and other technically trained observers have been ridiculed or explained away as mistakes, delusions, or hoaxes. It is imperative that we learn where the UFOs come from and what their purpose is. The public has a right to know. In a signed statement dated August 22, 1960, sent to Congress, Hillenkoetter said, "It is time for the truth to be brought out. Behind the scenes, high-ranking Air Force officers are soberly concerned about the UFOs, but through official secrecy and ridicule, many citizens are led to believe the unknown flying objects are nonsense. I urge immediate congressional action to reduce the dangers from secrecy about UFOs. Two dangers are steadily increasing. 1. The risk of accidental war from mistaking UFO formations for a Soviet surprise attack. 2. The danger that the Soviet government may, in a critical moment, falsely claim the UFOs as secret Russian weapons against which our defenses are helpless." But in 1962, Hillenkoetter suddenly resigned from NICAP. "In my opinion, NICAP's investigation has gone as far as possible," he wrote in his letter of resignation. "I know the UFOs are not US or Soviet devices. All we can do now is wait for some action by the UFOs. The Air Force cannot do any more under the circumstances. It has been a difficult assignment for them, and I believe we should not continue to criticize their investigations." Kehoe was convinced that Hillenkoetter had been pressured at a very high level to resign. Whatever the truth, it was a severe blow to NICAP's prestige, and Kehoe was bitterly disappointed. Another former Central Intelligence Agency official on the board of NICAP was Colonel Joseph J. Bryan III, founder and original chief of the CIA's Psychological Warfare Staff and former special assistant to the Secretary of the Air Force, as well as aviation advisor to NATO. In a letter to Kehoe, Colonel Bryan made the following positive statement on the UFO problem. "I am aware that hundreds of military and airline pilots, airport personnel, astronomers, missile trackers, and other competent observers have reported sightings of UFOs. I am also aware that many of these UFOs have been reported maneuvering in formation, and that many were simultaneously tracked by radar. It is my opinion that the UFOs reported by competent observers are devices under intelligent control. Their speeds, maneuvers, and other technical evidence make them superior to any known aircraft or space devices now produced on Earth. These UFOs are interplanetary devices, systematically observing the Earth, either manned or under remote control, or both. Information on UFOs, including sighting reports, has been, and is still being, officially withheld. This policy is dangerous, especially since mistaken identification of UFOs as a secret Russian attack might accidentally set off war. Unless this policy is changed, a congressional investigation should be held to reduce or eliminate this and other dangers." This statement was made in 1960, shortly after Bryan joined NICAP. Kehoe was unaware of Bryan's involvement with the Central Intelligence Agency, a fact which did not emerge until 1977, when Bryan admitted to having been a former covert official for the agency and asked that this not be made public, since it might embarrass Central Intelligence Agency. He denied any association with the Central Intelligence Agency during the period he served on the board of NICAP. Todd Zeckel has uncovered a great deal of evidence for the infiltration of NICAP by the Central Intelligence Agency. Although debunker Philip Klass has tried to discredit Zeckel's background in the intelligence field, inquiries have established that Zeckel was indeed employed by the Army Security Service, the forerunner of the National Security Agency, as well as the NSA itself. Also, his published articles reflect a broad knowledge about the intelligence community. According to Zeckel, a number of Central Intelligence Agency covert agents worked themselves into key positions in NICAP. One was Count Nicholas Rochefort, now deceased, who had been a member of the CIA's psychological warfare staff and who became vice chairman of NICAP in the year of its foundation, 1956. Another was Bernard J. Carvalho, who had been a go-between for such secretly owned companies as Fairway Corporation, a charter airline used by Central Intelligence Agency executives. Carvalho was appointed chairman of NICAP's membership subcommittee at one time. During the 1960s, former Central Intelligence Agency briefing officer Carl Fleck became chairman of NICAP's Washington, D.C. subcommittee. He is said to have denied that the Central Intelligence Agency ever asked him for information on either UFOs or NICAP. Zeckel further claims that an undated Central Intelligence Agency document, anonymously written, indicates familiarity with G. Stuart Nixon, former assistant to NICAP's president, John Ellicott, and states that in the late 1960s and early 1970s, the NICAP daily logs show that Nixon met with several past and present Central Intelligence Agency employees on a frequent basis. The Central Intelligence Agency officials allegedly included Art Lindahl, then director of the CIA's National Photographic Interpretation Center, Frederick Durant, former Central Intelligence Agency Office of Scientific Intelligence missile expert and author of the Robertson Panel Report, and Dr. Charles Sheldon, a Central Intelligence Agency consultant. According to Zeckel, Major Kehoe was deliberately ousted by the Central Intelligence Agency infiltrators in 1969, after which a former head of the Society of Photographic Scientists and Engineers, allegedly with Central Intelligence Agency affiliations, John Acuff, took over as president. Zeckel concluded, maybe it's a coincidence that the founder of the CIA's psychological warfare staff has been on the board of NICAP for nearly 20 years. Maybe it's another coincidence that Charles Lombard, a former Central Intelligence Agency covert employee, according to himself, would seek out retired Central Intelligence Agency executive to run the organization. That is after Jack Acuff was replaced by retired Central Intelligence Agency agent Alan N. Hall in 1979. Or maybe we're all paranoid. Perhaps Kehoe deserved to be fired from the organization he built with his own sweat, blood, and sacrifice. The timing couldn't have been better in any case. Kehoe, after all, was beginning to focus on the Central Intelligence Agency in 1969, instead of his tunnel-visioned attacks on the Air Force, if they wanted to destroy the leading anti-secrecy organization of the 1960s. They couldn't have done a better job if they'd tried. Resources above top secret, Timothy Good, 1988. My take. The Central Intelligence Agency seems to be going to an awful lot of trouble to keep track of and infiltrate UFO groups. I wonder why that is. Is it to keep track of the so-called crazy people? Is it to use these groups as a UFO information source? More details on this topic on our website. See the link in the description below.